Hello, Fellowship family. My name is Jennifer Elrod, and I want to welcome you to this evening, commemorating the 1 year since the Atlanta shooting of 8 women, 6 of whom were Asian. This conversation tonight is going to be a space for grief, lament, honor, and remembrance. We are just here tonight together with my AAPI sisters to talk about that. We will be processing also through the continued acts of violence that have happened to women, specifically here in the US. I'm joined here by some amazing friends who I'll have introduce themselves shortly, but we've just experienced a year of trauma and loss, and we're gonna talk about that tonight. But I think there's also been some really beautiful moments for community together. But we would not be a fellowship family without a question of the day. And so I'm gonna have my friends here introduce themselves and share with us their go-to comfort meal.
Hi, I'm Audrey Ceballos. My go-to comfort meal is kare kare, which is a Filipino dish. It's a peanut stew with oxtail, and you eat it with shrimp paste over rice. I am a mom of 2 rambunctious boys, and I do ministry outreach work. And yeah, I also identify as multi-ethnic.
My name is Jean Okamoto. I am a 4th generation Japanese American, and I actually am not a member of the fellowship family, but I got connected through the Center for Racial Reconciliation and the table talks and have made a nuisance of myself ever since. And my go-to comfort food is my mom's recipe for chicken soup with rice, which is also the name of a Maurice Sendak children's book.
It's my favorite kids book.
I was older than I probably should have been when I realized that his version probably didn't have like soy sauce and daikon radish.
Ooh, yeah.
But I think he was missing out, so.
Hi, I'm Christine Park. I am Korean American. I am married and have a son who's 16 years old. And I'm also a fellowship staff member. My go-to food would be tofu stew. I love my tofu. Spicy or mild, yeah.
Hi, my name is Regina Chow Trammell, and I am a 2nd generation Chinese American born and raised in Los Angeles. I'm not a part of the fellowship family, but I know Jen from APU, so I'm a professor of social work at APU. And my go-to comfort food is similar. It's a chicken soup with rice, juk, and you put some dried lo song on there, and that's so good.
Oh, so delicious. Well, my name is Jennifer. I go by Jen, always with 2 N's if you know me. And my go-to comfort meal, I would say, is Filipino breakfast. So a rice bowl with some fatty sausage, a runny egg, and then anything else that you want to throw into it. I work in higher education with Regina and have been a part of the fellowship family for 6 years. And I love the Center for Racial Reconciliation and get to teach and facilitate some table talks on food justice. So it's a passion of mine, but I'm so thankful to have each of you here with us tonight for this conversation. When we think of the last year, there's been so much that's happened with pandemic. We've seen an increase of the need for mental health resources. We've seen an increase in the need for community. But we've also seen an increase in violence and loss, specifically for the AAPI community. So we enter this space, I think, with a lot of weightiness and a lot of heaviness. And so to get us started, just talking about the last year, I'd love for each of us to read a headline that we've seen in the news headlines over the last year. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Audrey.
94-year-old Thai immigrant slashed across the face.
8 dead in Atlanta spa shooting with fears of anti-Asian bias.
New York City subway station death of Michelle Go leaves Asian Americans reeling.
Woman found dead in Manhattan apartment after being stabbed 40 times.
Man charged with 7 hate crimes in the course of 2 hours. In the past month alone, 9 Asian women have been attacked or murdered in New York. That's after an increase of Asian hate that we've seen with the pandemic, solely based on some of the rhetoric that's being used. As we approach the 1-year mark of Atlanta, I know that we sit with such a heaviness. So before we talk about that, I kind of just want to slow us down a little bit and have everyone Those watching at home and those here with us, let's just close our eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. So go ahead and close your eyes and take a deep breath in and exhale. Breathe in again and exhale. And take one more deep breath in and exhale. So I just want to pose the question with you guys here, my sisters and my friends. How has the last year been for you as an Asian American woman? And what have you been seeing, experiencing, and feeling? So Jean, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. So I think the past year has been, one of the hardest things was like the extreme contrast, I think, in the different communities that I'm a part of. So from my Asian American community, I was getting questions like, what kind of pepper spray do you think I should buy to give to my aunties? Or someone forwarded a link like, hey, this is a self-defense class specifically for Asian American women. Like, do you want to practice together? And so that was one kind of world that I was sitting in. And then also I was part of a majority white church at the time. And so I kind of brought this experience to a friend, an older woman who was not Asian American, and kind of just explained where I was sitting and what I was feeling. And the response I got was essentially, well, you can't expect us to really know or understand what you're going through because it has nothing to do with us. And so I think just holding those two reactions or experiences together has been hard, kind of sussing out like, okay, maybe we're overblowing things and overreacting, and like what is really justified as far as like this response of fear. And I think as the months went on last year, I kind of started going more towards that second response of like, okay, maybe it's not something that we need to keep talking about or bringing up. And I think I started going more from, for example, being afraid to walk around alone by myself because I'm an Asian American woman. Like, I got to revert back to a normal stage of being afraid to walk alone because I'm just a woman. Yeah. So I think that's been the past year for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing. Christine, what about you? What has the past year been like for you?
I think it's been really heavy. I think starting with the pandemic and with all the racial injustice that we've seen with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and then compounded with Asian hate crimes, especially to women, the elderly, just the vulnerable. It's a lot to take in, and while you try not to watch the news too much, you still want to be informed. And I think even personally, it made me cautious and wary, and I was actually in a situation where I was being followed by a car, and it was in my own safe neighborhood. That just, I think with everything going on, it made me frightened. And for the first time, my husband bought me a pepper spray. And I would never think of doing, worrying about taking a walk in my own neighborhood, and carrying a spray or making sure that I'm not out at night. So it's a lot of things, but it's one thing after another. It's hard to process all of it together.
Absolutely. Well, it just seems like there's obviously such a tension at place that you and Jean are speaking of just this tension of like, it's hard to be a woman as it is in this society, and then to be an Asian American woman in that capacity and sitting in those tensions is really, really hard. Regina, what about you?
Yeah, similar. I think just the cumulative stressors of these headlines. I think about my grandma who would walk to the bus and just stopped going to Chinatown on her own. And I think about my cousin who lives in New York City and literally just over text, just stay safe, stay alert. And, I'm mad. I'm actually really mad. I was born and raised here. A lot of us, you're fourth generation Japanese. I just think it's ridiculous that we have to feel like this in our own country.
Yeah, absolutely. Audrey, what about you? What has the tension been like for you, or kind of what have you been experiencing and feeling in that?
Well, being multi-ethnic, I feel like I'm a chameleon in a lot of spaces, and I'm majority Filipino, so I'm more sad and, upset for others. Like, I think about my mother. My mother could have been that woman in the subway in New York, or my aunt or my grandmother, So for me, it's like I might feel protected because I can blend in, but for the rest of my family who can't, or my sisters who are fully Filipino, they don't, I feel like I have a sense of where I need to protect them or, fight for justice for them. And they're very quiet and very, they say to themselves they've been at home, they don't go anywhere, So for me, it's been more of our ancestors came to America. I'm also, to find a better life, and we're going through all this. Like what you said about, you're fourth generation, you were raised here, I was raised here, and to see this happen to our family members, it's just upsetting. So it was hard to, at first I was just like, oh, this is just something else, but then as it's continuing to happen and no one's speaking up, especially in our realm of being Asian, no one's speaking up. So it's hard to feel this way and be like, am I feeling normal? Is this okay? And when you finally say, yes, it is okay to lament and cry over it, it's, that's when the stepping stone of realizing what's going on is happening.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, we gaslight ourselves into saying that these experiences and this heaviness and these feelings aren't real. As someone who's multi-ethnic as well, I'm Filipino, Chinese, and Caucasian, and sitting in the tension of, I had white church members making jokes at the expense of COVID, and, what we thought was going to be this short-term 2-week thing is, we're almost 3 years into it now, but I just remember a woman from my parents' church coming at me in the DMs, like, you're the reason I can't spend time with my family, because she had seen us gather with no context of we had tested, we had quarantined, and to see even like a Christian friend posting online, like, what's a place that's unforgettable that you've traveled to, or a place that's unforgettable, and someone posting Wuhan. And like the roller coaster, I feel like a roller coaster of emotions kind of just best describes of like, there's these really beautiful moments of community, spaces like this where we're getting to sit together with one another, but then also just like having to justify my tears or like try to explain to someone what I'm feeling and the weightiness and the heaviness of that, I think is really hard. Or in moments when we do share a piece of that story or a piece of that feeling, I don't feel really seen or known, or like people don't know how to respond to it. And so we sit in that tension constantly. And so thank you each so much for sharing just a piece of what you've experienced so far. One of the ways I think that we can best care for ourselves in this process and in these last few years is the significance of self-care and soul care. Self-care is kind of taking a stop just for a moment to do something for yourself. So maybe that's going to eat a good meal, or it's getting a pedicure, enjoying a facial, or a time with a friend is some self-care. Hashtag self-care is the thing we hear. But I think the thing that's really important is soul care and the significance of what it means to spiritually recline with the Holy Spirit and recline with God, and what it means to take those deep inhales and exhales and to do prayers of lament, but also prayers of just processing and breath prayers. And so I'd love to pose the question to you, Regina. This is kind of your field and your wheelhouse, and I know that you counsel so many people in this space, specifically over this last year. But what does it look like to have self-care and soul care for people in this season of pandemic, but specifically for Asian American women? And like, are there practices that you recommend that can be incorporated in this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think when we talk about self-care, right, we're talking about how do we get through these stressful moments, and we talk about soul care, I think it's deeper. And so my areas on mindfulness, particularly Christian mindfulness, I just wrote a book about it, and I counsel a lot of Asian American women, actually, and something that what I'd like to think about, and when we think about mindfulness, and I love that you kind of had us breathe, right? It's just to remember that God is present with us, and what helps me, at least I'll say personally, and then what I think has helped other women has been this idea that I am created in God's image, right? And so as I'm with him and present with him, he's reminding me in those quiet moments that I'm his, he's mine, and I reflect who he is, that I'm not perpetual foreigner, I'm not minority, I am just Regina in God's presence. And I think that's the gift of kind of being with God in that space. One practice I think has been powerful. I led a group last summer, and I had everyone, just for homework, and just encourage everyone who's listening, to, especially if you're Asian American, a lot of comments are around our eyes, right? And the way people insult us is to kind of pull at their eyes, right? And so just to kind of be in a mindful place and stare in the mirror at your eyes and think back kind of how those eyes were shaped, generation, the DNA, the ancestry that we've had, and to take just 5 minutes to do that. They say eyes are the windows of the soul. So just to look at that and think through like how God has kind of moves through these generations to shape our eyes. The way they look now is stamped from our ancestors.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I don't know about, when was the last time you just stared at yourself in the mirror in appreciation of, I am an image bearer of Christ. And as a woman, I reveal a piece of Christ in that capacity as an Asian American woman. A follow-up question for you, Regina, of how do you practice lament in this space? Or how is lament helpful as we're navigating these really heavy and hard things?
Yeah, lament's so important for our own healing and for being able to sit with the emotions that we feel. Kind of like what Christine had said, these stressors have been cumulative. And so if we don't pause, we don't give ourselves some space to kind of feel deeply, I think there's a disembodiment about moving on, right, from these headlines. So I think God gives us this gift of lament. Dr. Soong-Chang Rah wrote a good book about lament. I think that's a great resource to think more about it. But I think the way we lament is to feel and to give our sorrow, and to give, for me, it's a lot of anger right now. It's to give that anger to God, and then he fills us, right? And he's our protector and safety, and then we can feel safe again. Because if we don't lament, just from a mental health standpoint, if we just carry the stress and it accumulates, that can affect us, right? It can turn into anxiety or depression. So I think, again, lament is not just, I'm not trying to say it's practical, it's soul care, and it's also self-care.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I just love the practice of lament. It's been a practice that the Center for Racial Reconciliation has really tried to incorporate in almost all of the table talks we've done and in the workshops of holding the tension too of lament is not just the anger, but it's also the joy. It's coexisting in the joy and the grief. And when I read through the Psalms, and 60% of the Psalms are filled with lament, I'm just reminded of I need to slow down and take a moment to catch my breath and to reflect and to journal, to pray, whatever that looks like. So thank you everyone so much for sharing so far about the space. And Regina, thank you for offering just your expertise in this. One thing I do love about fellowship is that we are a multi-ethnic, intergenerational space. And so we get to sit in this space of diversity and inclusion. So I'm just wondering, as we sit in multi-ethnic spaces, whether it's here at fellowship, outside of fellowship, in the workplace, do you feel like you have had opportunity or space to share your frustration and your pain over this last year, the last 3 years, that you've been able to kind of vocalize and put words to that pain and frustration in the church or even just in the communities that you're involved in? Christine, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I feel personally really blessed to be at Fellowship because we have had these hard conversations, and it starts with Albert and just being really transparent and honest about how he feels, what he's experienced, and even during a staff meeting when we've had like small groups, we would break out and talk about our experiences, our sorrows, how we lament, and sharing it with our brothers and sisters in that space. And I didn't know how needed, how much I needed that until, I was in that space. And so I'm just deeply grateful for having spaces like that as well. I do recall the center giving us a really beautiful opportunity for the Asian AAPI women, the community, to gather together over Zoom and also lament and talk about our different experiences, shared experiences, and just being able to learn, not only share but really learn and to know that you're not alone in this, and that this is real. And as Americans with our ethnic backgrounds, and as women, as Asian American women, this is a place for us, to speak up and to also seek God, seek community, as well as you said, just soul care, which is so important. Yeah.
I remember that night, and it was so needed. And I think there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of tears, but there was also a lot of beauty to see these beautiful eyes across the screen and getting to share in that space. Regina, what about you? Do you feel like in the multi-ethnic spaces, whether higher education or in your church, that you've had the opportunities to voice pain and frustration?
Yes, I mean, it was nice to be able to partner with you, Jen, to do that on our campus community. I thought that was really powerful. And then you're invited again to kind of a social work gathering. And then, I think in every space, at least I've had the opportunity to speak out. And I think that's been new for me, to be able to really offer that anger, offer that raw emotion, just so people can see that, it's not just me, right? It's a whole community. So I think the more we can raise awareness in our respective spaces, and the more that people listen, it's been nice. People have listened.
Yeah, and I feel like the more we share our stories, the more people feel comfortable to speak forward to, and to share like, oh, I've experienced that, I've dealt with that. And it's been a great source for community. We met on Zoom originally, and we were sharing, I just remember we were on a Zoom meeting and we're like, Atlanta had just happened, and there was like, we need to do something. And then it quickly became, we're gonna do something. And that's how Regina and I met, and we got to bond and share this space of vocalizing these really hard emotions and feelings, and then quickly bonded over food and community and just the beauty of dumplings in that space. Audrey, what about you? What has it been like to share your pain and frustration? Have you felt safe space in that?
I actually haven't. Where I work and attend church, I don't feel safe to voice it. I feel like also in my group of friends and my multi-ethnic friends who are also half Asian, they can't get past their own trauma to look back at the ancestry of how far we've come to actually let it affect them. Or even my own sisters and cousins, they are silent. And so I feel like this is the only space that I've had in the past year, or in the racial, Center of Racial Reconciliation and doing the 1.0 and all the table talks we've been part of. That's been part of my healing as an Asian American
So I haven't had the chance to talk. Like, I can cry on my own, and my dear husband would be like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I just posted something on social media, you should read it." You know, like, that's my way of putting it out there, but no one really asks, you know, like, how did you feel, you know? So I don't have that space until now.
Well, so happy to be in this space with you. And I'm sorry that you haven't had it, but I'm glad that the center and these spaces are created so that way we can have it. We're going to build our own table for the spaces where this doesn't exist. Yeah, I would agree with you. It's been this tension of like, oh man, I'm so thankful for Fellowship and the Center for Racial Reconciliation, of like getting text messages and having friends check in. But I think also in sharing some of my pains and frustration, I've gotten a lot of silence, which is so hard, because it's these friendships that I've built, and that people who I thought really saw and knew me. And they knew me as Jen, but did they know me as Jen, an Asian American woman? And so it's been so interesting as I've shared in certain spaces to just get a prayer hands emoji, because they don't know what to say. And so instead of misstepping forward, I have a friend who says, I'd rather misstep forward than stay silent, because the silent sometimes communicates more than enough. Of what does it look like to just say, I see you and I support you, I don't know what to say, or what does that tension look like? And so there's been really great moments where I have felt so seen and so known, and others where like I unfortunately have lost quite a few friendships in pandemic. Over a multitude of things, but also as I've shared about my experiences as an Asian American woman, I've gotten a lot of silence and crickets, and like, that's really hard to not feel like I'm heard, especially from people in the church. And so it's been, I think, an ebb and a flow of like moments where I'm like really thankful I shared, and then other moments where I'm like, that I didn't feel seen or known or heard. So Jean, what about you?
Yeah, I think so. I started attending a church, a multi-ethnic church, about halfway through last year. And so I think in some ways that's been really healing for me, as far as like just more understanding and openness to like having those conversations. I think the space is there for the taking, but you still have to step up and take it, right? And I think that's the part that's been hard for me. I think even though it is like a safer multi-ethnic space, it's still some element of like oppression Olympics, right? Like, well, we're Asian American women and like some things are hard, but like other people have it harder, and being really conscious even within the Asian American community, like I'm a Japanese American and I'm complaining about these things to other members of my church, which is mostly Korean American, and understanding that very fraught history where Japan was committing just terrible acts of aggression against Korea, and all of that kind of heaviness just being really present in some of those interactions. Entirely from my side, I think, but I think it's still a matter of the spaces there and just actually taking it up.
Yeah. Wow, thank you all so much for sharing. It's hard, but I'm thankful that we get to share together in this space. For those who are tuning in and watching, who are not AAPI community, what would you say solidarity looks like for those who are non-Asian? What does solidarity look like for you, for people to show up and to care and love in that space? Audrey, why don't we start with you?
I feel like you said earlier, like just seeing us, like seeing who we are, and wanting to learn more of where we came from and why we are who we are, you know? I think it was our table talk last night where it's a food justice table talk, and it's like you can't go eat an egg roll and then, you know, not be cool with that Chinese person across the street, you know? Like, so it's just wanting to know the person and loving them fully and seeing them as an image of God, is what I'm looking for in solidarity. So, yeah.
Thank you. Christine, what about you? What does solidarity look like for you?
I think being in many different spaces where it is multi-ethnic, whether it's at church or friends, I think I don't expect them, they don't look like me, they don't vote like me, they're very different. Even among Asian Americans, we're uniquely different. Our cultural backgrounds are different, but I think at the end of the day, I want, regardless of what we look like and how we act, and my desire is for my brothers and sisters to stand together with me, and just to be able to learn from one another, to be able to listen, share our stories, feel safe about it, and really grow together in our compassion for one another. And that takes proximity, that takes a lot of intentionality and care, empathy, where to a point where it turns into action, really, and doing something about it, and even, having a voice when we would rather be in the background, but being able to speak up and to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sitting here with us and using your voice. I know it's a really hard space to have Asian women want to use their voice. We're often placed in, I think, boxes of hospitality. And I think we're so much more than that. We have so much to say. And so thank you to each of you for using your voice in this space and raising your voice when necessary, and just communicating what solidarity means. What about you, Regina? What does solidarity mean to you and for you in this space?
Yeah, I think Christine summed it up really well, but I would just say, being able to share stories and moving away from kind of stereotype into intimacy, like, instead of a kind of a surface level, being able to really understand and care enough that when a headline comes up, that a friend would know that's going to affect me, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's gonna come down to that emotional connection for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Jean, what about you? What does solidarity look like to you?
I think one of the most personally impactful examples of solidarity that I heard a year ago was actually from Pastor Tate. And I think he had a video right after the Atlanta shootings. And his message was essentially, this was an attack on my family, and that's why it matters to me. And I think that contrasted with the message from the rest of the church that I was getting, which was essentially, it's not my problem. I think solidarity to me means it is your problem too. And if it's hurting our people or my people, then it's also hurting yours.
Yeah, especially I think when we're in family at the table. We hear these analogies from Pastor Tate. So thankful we have a pastor who leads us in that capacity of inviting us to the hard conversations around the table. And I'll say it meant a lot to see his tears. I think the day after Atlanta, to know that, I didn't think I was gonna cry. To know that, we have a church family and a pastor who sees and knows us, and creates spaces like these that we get to sit in. I think for me, solidarity, what does it look like to feel seen and known and to share story? There's an analogy of your story is like your baby, and you would not hand your baby to anyone, even grandma who's begging to hold your baby. Like, you handle and place over a baby with care, and you don't just give your baby to anybody. And so when we share our stories, I just love the analogy of it's handing over our baby, of something really, really precious. But we also get to choose who journeys and processes with us as we grow forward. And I think to know that I'm fully seen and known because someone wants to sit and have coffee with me, and they're not going to press me or push me or demand of my story, but they just want to create safety and space for if I feel comfortable to share that. And I think on a really practical level, solidarity is the commitment to learning and educating yourself. Dr. Erica Lee has a book called The Making of Asian America. Oh, I did not know most of what I read in that book of like how long Asian Americans have been here and the significant things that they have contributed to and done. One of the first discrimination acts was the Page Act of 1875 against Asian American women, specifically Chinese women, in exclusion. And then we see the Chinese Exclusion Act and so many other things that have been done against Asian people, against Asian women. And so I think solidarity looks like educating yourself. Audrey and I learned there are so many things on Netflix and Hulu that you can be watching and learning and understanding. Don't stand in line, down the street we have 4 boba places across the street from each other. You can't say you love boba but not have a cultural understanding of the oppression and experiences that people have gone through. You can't love ramen but not know and understand the history of it. And food justice, food justification, learning and educating yourself on things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, on Manzanar, and just the tensions of the LA riots. And there's just so much history to be learned and taught, and even just articulating language in that capacity too. I'm really thankful that the center has given a lot of us a baseline of language and created a table and a safe space for us to feel seen and known. And so I'm so thankful for each of you being in this space. I hope you feel seen and known and not forgotten, specifically tonight in this space. But as we close out this space, I just want to remind everyone that you are not forgotten. Dear sister, dear friend, you are seen and known. And we're so thankful that you've joined us here in this space this evening. And we'd love to stay connected with you. We are looking to start an AAPI collective, so we can do more things like this together. So if you are interested in that, we would love for you to email reconciliation@madeforfellowship.com. Additionally, stay tuned because the month of May is AAPI Heritage Month, and we have so many wonderful things planned for that, and we're excited to celebrate that. And then also, we have the Asian American Civil Rights Tour, which happens in July. And as someone who's been on that tour, I got to go on it right before pandemic hit and the world shut down. The Asian American Civil Rights Tour is a really great opportunity to learn, travel up and down the coast of California, learning about the history of Asian Americans. And so it's a really beautiful opportunity. You can visit madeforfellowship.com/reconciliation to learn more about that. But thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and I look forward to more spaces together, and next time we'll make sure to bring food.